Okay, so this is how I would edit your photo, which is from a JPEG. First thing I would do is I would go into the main basic editor here and check the white balance. Now it is quite dark, but it looks like it's either sunrise or sunset, so I would maybe warm it up a little, and even when you see it, as I warm it up, you can see it even lightens up the image as well. So if I even bring it way up there, you see it's way too warm, but you see the image is lightened. Bring it down and it goes to, well, I don't know what that is. So let's warm it up a little bit. I normally don't play with the tint. Normally also I don't really play with the exposure too much, but I'll maybe notch it up a little bit. But when I get to something like this, I would increase the shadows and I would decrease the highlights. So you want a sort of bit of balance. You want the light bits darker and the dark bits lighter to try and balance it. Now if I zoom in, there's not much noise there, so we're doing okay. I mean, I could bring these up more, but I want to make it balanced. But now that that's up, I can maybe even bring the exposure down a little bit. So you really want to start with the shadows and highlights first. Whites, I would normally bring up the whites a tiny bit and bring the blacks down a little bit as well, just to add that wee bit of contrast. Now when it comes to contrast, you see what the contrast does. I normally add a little bit of contrast, but in this case I think it might look a wee bit better to reduce the contrast ever so slightly. Clarity I would do next because it can give it a wee bit of a sharpen. So I'll bring it up. Normally my rule of thumb with things like clarity and especially hue and saturation and stuff, never really go before the first notch. You kind of are safe there. I would also bring up the vibrance a little bit. After that I go all the way down to calibration and I bring up the reds a little bit, and you see this goes weird, and I bring down the blues a little bit, and that kind of corrects that a little, and then I make the green somewhere that makes sense. So about there I think looks okay. It's maybe, you don't want to overdo the saturation, especially on the greens here, because that's going to go away. So I'll bring that down a little bit. Sometimes you need to correct for the greens here, which I think I will bring this down to the left a little bit. Once I've done that, sometimes the hue is a bit weird, so that's when I go up next to the hue, saturation, luminance, and I would correct for those. So I just basically bring it up and down and see what it looks like. Normally, like, there you go, that's far too much, that's far too much as well. But I'd maybe bring that down a little bit to the red. Don't really go beyond that first notch. This one here, it depends if you want greens or a wee bit more sort of autumnal greens. I'd maybe dial them back a little bit. The greens there, if you notice the green slider doesn't really do much, it's the green of the grass, it's actually the yellow. Then my sky, now there isn't much sky here, but normally when I do that thing with the calibration, the sky looks weird, so you may have to bring the aqua and the blue up a little bit to make it more sense, but there isn't much blue in this. Purples, bringing it up and down doesn't seem to make much of a difference, so I'll leave that. Same with the magenta. Then saturation, you don't want to oversaturate. Now this one is a little bit undersaturated here, I think, for the sky, so let's bring those up a little bit. There isn't much blue. Bring that up though. With the sky, normally I would drop down the luminance for the sky to make the blues pop out a little bit, and then maybe drop down the luminance for this as well to make that sky there pop. And then what I do is that from there I would go into the color grading, and by default normally I just drop a bit of blue into the shadows. Midtones I either go up to warmer or down to darker depending on what I think is best. I'll try up, and the highlights I would normally warm up in something like this anyway. I'd warm up the highlights as well. That's maybe a wee bit too warm, so maybe, yeah, bring the midtones down a little bit. Then I go down to blending here, bring the blending up, and then I can see what I want. If I go to the left, it's going to favor the shadows. If I go to the right, it's going to favor the highlights. Now, based on this, I think I'm going to the right. I think I like that glow from the sunrise. So let's leave that there. Then I go to the overall global, and I see how that looks. I'll maybe bring that up a wee bit there. And luminance will maybe lighten it a wee tiny bit for me as well. After that, I go down to the next one, the detail. And normally, if you hold the control or the option key, depending on what you're using, then you will see how the sharpening works. So when you hold the option key, it goes black and white, and it gives you a better idea of what's going on. So I normally never go really above 70-ish. Don't normally change the radius. The radius kind of shows you some of the detail. Masking I do bring up because I don't want everything sharpened, because you'll sharpen the noise. So I normally have the masking cranked all the way up and just have those edges done. Now, what does that look like if I zoom in? Take off the sharpening, add sharpening. Yeah, it does a wee bit, and maybe add a wee bit more. There isn't really much noise here at all, so I'm not even gonna take away the noise. Next is, well, the lens profile. I don't have any lens information, so I'm not going to do that. And if you want, I would maybe pop in a wee vignette if you wanted to. Normally I'd drop the midpoint and increase the feather, and it's always good just to turn it off and on to see if it makes a good difference. I kind of like the vignette there. And that's honestly about it. After that, I would do some more finer adjustments to the sky and bits and pieces. But now, do we have noise in the sky? No, not too bad. So I would, because there's not much sky behind this, I'll maybe leave it as it is. But what I might do is add a wee graduated filter there, and I would darken the grass at the front. Let's bring it up a wee bit. I don't want to darken the house, so I'm going to do a range mask by color, and I'm going to select the green. And if I hold my option or my what do you call it? Command control, you'll see I'm only getting the leaves. All I want is the leaves there of the grass. Now, where is that? Gradient, there we go. And I'll want to darken that, so I want to bring the shadows down there, because do I want the grass in or not? I don't know actually. I think just darkening that a little bit just helps reduce the contrast. I don't want it sticking out too much. And then what I can do is turn it off and on to see how it looks. That was before, that was after. I think darkening it really helps a wee bit. Then I want to do a radial filter. Normally I do a radial filter on the subject, so I'll bring it over the subject, which of course is the house. I invert it, and I will just increase the exposure ever so slightly, maybe increase the contrast a bit, up the shadows, bring the contrast up a little bit more, and sometimes a wee dehaze can help. And I think that's it. Now that post is a bit annoying in the way there, but I'm not going to touch that. What I will do though is take my spot healing brush, and I will paint out that wee thing there and make that disappear, and maybe paint out this here. Basically anything, any highlights like that as well. I might take my eye away from the main picture. And that's it. That's how I would edit that photo. Now, one thing, since the other photo is kind of similar, what I can do is come to this photo, hit Control C, copy everything but my local adjustments, and then come to this photo and then paste it, and let's see how that initially looks. That looks pretty much almost good to go. There's these lines which I would paint out, And with this, what I'll show you is with a graduated filter. Here, I'll maybe take away that. I'll maybe warm it up a bit, but I will decrease the exposure, decrease the highlights a little bit, but that's going to affect the house as well. So I want to arrange mask. I'm going to do it by luminance. Hold down my option key or control and you'll see I only want the lighter bits there, so the house is pretty much not going to be touched. We'll bring that up. No, there we go. So now these adjustments are just going to be to the sky itself, and bring the the blacks down a little bit maybe. No, it doesn't do much. No, it does a bit. And I think that's maybe it. Do I want to do anything here? Actually, that looks a wee bit. Well, let's have a look. Let's see what happens if I bring the shadows up in the house. Tiny bit. Bring up the contrast. Maybe bring up the feather as well. And again, I have copied the bottom bit here, my range mask. I think again the grass is maybe a little bit too bright. Oh no, that was the wrong thing. Undo. Guess I didn't have any local adjustments, so let me bring this one up here and drop the exposure down of the grass. Of course I want the luminant color mask for the green, so that only the green gets taken. There we go. And bring down. So yeah, I think that's decent enough. Maybe that's a wee bit too bright, part of me thinks. If I bring the shadows up, I bring the highlights down there. What does that do? Yeah, that'll do. So there's both images. Certainly, I love this one and how it looks after the edits. Hope that helps.